Europe's third busiest airport just committed €6 billion to its own future, the largest capital program in Schiphol's history, scaling toward $10 billion by 2035. But the majority shareholder behind that bet is the same Dutch state that has spent years trying to cap flights, cut operations, and force the airport to shrink. 2 policy attempts, 2 court defeats. And right now, no legal framework governs how many planes can actually use the infrastructure being built. This is a story of billions wagered on an airport whose own government hasn't decided whether to let it grow. Amsterdam Airport Schiphol secures its position as Europe's third busiest hub, behind London Heathrow and Paris Charles de Gaulle, when measured by total aircraft takeoffs and landings. This movement-based capacity, rather than passenger rankings, is the metric driving both the airport's economic model and its political battleground. To maintain this high-frequency status, Royal Schiphol Group launched a major financial campaign in August 2024. The operator announced a €6 billion investment plan running through 2029, the single largest capital program in the airport's history. But the true scale of this defensive play continues to expand. Subsequent master plans now outline a combined €10 billion program extending out to 2035. This represents a substantial capital allocation, designed not as a guarantee of future expansion, but as a high-stakes gamble to fortify the airport's infrastructure while its ultimate operational limits remain entirely unresolved. This capital campaign aims to safeguard the fundamental mechanics of a global hub. Upgrading the baggage basement and passenger processing areas is designed to preserve Schiphol's long-term connectivity and continental relevance. Yet these investments rest on a precarious foundation. At the exact moment the board approved the multi-billion euro program, the Dutch government, Schiphol's own majority shareholder, was actively preparing regulatory measures to force a contraction of the airport's annual flights. The capital plan operates as a defensive shield, relying on operational volumes that the state is simultaneously working to dismantle. At the center of this collision lies the corporate architecture of Royal Schiphol Group. The airport is not a private enterprise, nor is it a standard public utility. Instead, it operates under a complex public shareholding structure where the Dutch state holds a commanding majority of nearly 70%. During the years leading up to the policy crisis, the remaining equity was held by local municipalities, led by Amsterdam and Rotterdam, alongside a minority partnership with Paris's Group ADP. But the state does not speak with a single voice. This majority shareholding is represented not by environmental regulators, but by the Ministry of Finance. From its offices in The Hague, the Ministry of Finance oversees corporate governance, capital decisions, and dividend yields. It views Schiphol as a major economic asset that must deliver financial returns, establishing an institutional divide within the state itself. The Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management operates as the statutory regulator, enforcing environmental mandates, noise limits, and nitrogen restrictions across the densely populated Randstad region. This establishes an unusual administrative friction. The Dutch state, as majority shareholder, has a direct interest in commercial activity, airline connectivity, passenger revenues, and the long-term value of its public asset. Yet the same state, through its regulatory division, sets the operating conditions that restrict this very growth. This owner versus opponent dual role represents an atypical governance tension among major world airports. While hubs like London Heathrow rely on private ownership and independent oversight, Schiphol's commercial survival and regulatory limits are decided within the same sovereign government. The result is a systemic conflict of interest. Corporate strategy and national environmental policy are in constant opposition, leaving a multi-billion euro investment plan highly vulnerable to the regulatory decisions of its own majority owner. In 2022, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management targeted the airport's operational core with a radical proposal, capping annual aircraft movements. A movement, defined as a single takeoff or landing, had peaked at nearly 500,000 per year. The ministry proposed slashing this limit down to 440,000. The rationale was rooted in environmental compliance. For years, local resident coalitions and environmental advocacy groups had pressured the government to address severe noise pollution and nitrogen emissions across the Randstad region, arguing that Schiphol was operating outside its legal environmental permits. But for a global transit hub, cutting flight volumes is not a simple reduction. It is a structural threat. Schiphol relies on a complex wave system, where incoming flights must coordinate precisely with outgoing departures to keep the hub viable. A lower movement ceiling squeezes this scheduling flexibility, jeopardizing the tight arrival and departure windows that international transfer airlines require. This regulatory intervention set off a prolonged political battle, pitting the state's environmental mandates directly against the logistical realities of its premier economic engine. In April 2023, the Dutch government's aggressive contraction strategy hit a major legal barrier. A Dutch court blocked the initial flight reduction plan, ruling that the Ministry of Infrastructure had bypassed mandatory European Union laws. Under European Union treaties, any country seeking to restrict flights must first complete a structured framework known as the balanced approach. This statutory sequence requires states to exhaustively analyze noise levels, consult international stakeholders, and evaluate alternative mitigation efforts before enacting hard capacity limits. A powerful industry alliance spearheaded the legal challenge. KLM, Delta Airlines, EasyJet, the International Air Transport Association, and the Air Transport Association of America targeted the government's procedural shortcuts. The carriers did not reject environmental targets outright. Instead, they fought to protect operational predictability, global network connectivity, and procedural fairness against abrupt capacity cuts. The court agreed, clarifying that its decision was strictly procedural. The ruling did not decide whether the hub should ultimately grow or shrink. Instead, it stripped the state of its unilateral authority, forcing the ministry back to the drafting table to begin a lengthy consultation process. The 2 years following the initial procedural block saw a series of policy revisions as the Ministry of Infrastructure attempted to draft a legally sound flight reduction plan. In late 2024, regulators completed a revised policy designed to take effect for the 2025 operating year. This updated policy established a cap of 478,000 annual movements and combined it with a strict limit of 27,000 night flights. By adjusting the ceiling upward, the state hoped to balance local noise complaints with the commercial demands of a major continental hub. But this regulatory compromise quickly collapsed in court. On March 11, 2026, the Council of State, serving as the highest administrative court in the Netherlands, struck down the overarching limit of 478,000 movements. The justices ruled that the Ministry of Infrastructure had failed to provide adequate justification for the cap. Specifically, the government could not prove a direct, quantitative link between a flat reduction in flight numbers and a measurable reduction in local noise pollution, especially since the policy treated all aircraft types identically, regardless of modern, quieter engine designs. This legal defeat stripped the state of its primary regulatory mechanism, creating a stark operational split at the airport. Because the court annulled the 2025 amendment, the legal framework for daytime operations reverted to a 2008 decree, which contains no total annual movement limit whatsoever. Currently, no overarching daytime capacity restriction exists in Dutch law, leaving airlines free to schedule flights within standard airport slot parameters. Yet the court did not grant a total victory to the aviation industry. The 27,000 night flight restriction remains fully active and enforceable. Because this specific nighttime limit went uncontested during the legal proceedings, the Council of State left it in place as a legally binding interim measure. The Dutch government is now legally obligated to draft an entirely new, legally defensible aviation policy. Until a replacement policy is completed, the airport operates in a regulatory vacuum. The Ministry of Finance, as majority shareholder, must watch the airport commit billions to infrastructure upgrades based on high traffic projections, while the Ministry of Infrastructure, as regulator, must scramble to design a brand new mechanism to restrict those very same flights. Funding these multi-billion euro infrastructure programs during a period of intense regulatory confusion shifted the battlefront directly to airline economics. To generate the necessary capital to finance its massive upgrades, Schiphol targeted its primary source of operational revenue, airport charges. In 2025, the airport operator applied a 41% landing fee increase. Separate financial reports framed this escalation as a cumulative 37% rate increase packaged across 3 years, rather than a single-year spike. These aeronautical charges are distinct from consumer ticket prices. Instead, they act as the baseline operational costs that dictate route economics, directly shaping airline network planning, passenger demand, and the long-term competitiveness of the Amsterdam hub against rival European gateways. KLM, Schiphol's largest commercial stakeholder and dominant carrier, launched a highly vocal public campaign against this new pricing framework. The airline warned that the steep hikes made Amsterdam significantly more expensive than competing European hubs in Copenhagen and Paris Charles de Gaulle, directly threatening the viability of its transfer network. The Netherlands Authority for Consumers and Markets investigated the airline's formal objections, but ultimately backed the airport, ruling that the 41% charge increase was not unreasonable given the airport's severe infrastructure requirements. This escalating commercial pressure eventually forced a tactical retreat. Facing sustained resistance from its major airline partners, Schiphol abandoned a planned 5% fee hike for 2026. The airport operator reversed the scheduled increase and proposed a total fee freeze, attempting to stabilize relations with the carriers that underwrite its entire economic system. The multi-billion euro financial bet is physically anchored in Schiphol's single-terminal layout. Unlike rival hubs that split operations across separate buildings, the airport is doubling down on its unified design to protect its hub mechanics. The core of this physical modernization is a new baggage handling basement, constructed to automate luggage processing far beneath the terminal floor. Above ground, the capital program targets the completion of the delayed Pier A, now scheduled to open in 2027, alongside a major renovation of Pier C. Upgrades extend to terminal check-in areas, taxiways, aircraft stands, climate control systems, and ground handling workspaces. Funding this physical overhaul puts immense strain on Schiphol's balance sheet. The airport operator relies on a combination of internal cash, commercial borrowing, and European Union backing. In July 2024, Royal Schiphol Group secured a loan of 175 million euros from the European Investment Bank, the first tranche of a broader 400 million euro financing package earmarked specifically for the baggage basement. But the airport's underlying financial margins are tight. In 2024, the group reported an underlying net result of 99 million euros, while its operational cash flow after investments plunged to negative 188 million euros. This substantial capital deficit highlights the real-time pressure on the operator. Schiphol frames these massive outlays under the rationale of quality and balance. Yet, with negative operational cash flow and rising debt-funded projects, the financial viability of this entire program rests on the volatile regulatory landscape of the Dutch state. In April 2023, Royal Schiphol Group attempted to seize the initiative by launching its own voluntary operating strategy. Branded as a drive to make the airport quieter, cleaner, and better, this self-imposed framework that was designed to buy political goodwill from local communities while shielding the hub's long-term network from more destructive state intervention. Under this plan, the operator committed to prohibiting takeoffs between midnight and 6 a.m. and banning landings between midnight and 5 a.m. It also announced a complete phase-out of private jet operations scheduled to begin in 2026, alongside the formal abandonment of long-held plans to build a second Kogbaan runway. These voluntary operational sacrifices represent a calculated defensive strategy. By cutting selected high-impact flights, Schiphol's management is trying to appease environmental regulators and secure the airport's broader daytime slot allocations. Yet this corporate compromise complicates an already fraught battle. It demonstrates that the airport operator is willing to shrink its own addressable market to save its remaining hub operations, even as its sovereign shareholder continues to draft new policies that could restrict them further. The Dutch government faces an unresolved political deadlock. After suffering two major court defeats within 4 years, the state is legally forced to redraft its entire national aviation strategy from scratch. Yet, beneath the terminal, the concrete continues to pour. Schiphol is actively executing its multi-billion euro overhaul, upgrading taxiways and constructing a massive underground baggage basement, even though the governing policy required to support these investments simply does not exist. At the heart of this conflict is the definition of usable capacity. True capacity is not measured in concrete and steel alone. Instead, it is a precarious equation balancing physical infrastructure, legally permitted movements, night access, airline demand, and affordable charges. If the state restricts any single variable, the commercial viability of the entire hub system suffers. This reality compresses the state's dual role into a single, stark choice: protecting public asset value or reducing environmental impacts. The Ministry of Finance, which oversees the state's shares, wants to preserve long-term asset value and future dividends. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Infrastructure is legally bound to enforce environmental compliance. These two state divisions are moving in opposite directions, leaving the airport caught directly in the middle. The final resolution of this friction remains completely unsettled. The core question is whether the majority shareholder will allow Schiphol to operate at the high traffic volumes its massive capital investments assume, or whether the state's next regulatory flight cap will undercut this 10 billion euro bet entirely. As concrete cures beneath Schiphol's terminals, the Dutch state remains locked in a costly paradox, acting as both the architect of the airport's future and its executioner. The ultimate risk is a sovereign owner incapable of reconciling its own ledger. Until the state decides what it values more, this multi-billion euro bet remains entirely up in the air. What is your take on this deadlock? Let us know below.